Steve in Chicago. Steve, you wanted to get back to the California shooting?
Well, yes, actually, and I also wanted to comment on what you were saying with regard to the debt. I find it an interesting issue, in that if, in fact, we were to stop this notion of having a national debt or us being able to buy bonds and so forth, I mean, it's so detrimental to our economy. I mean, what we have essentially since 2009, this horrific return on anyone willing to buy our national bonds. So, we're essentially getting other people's money to utilize it as we see fit and paying them back this horrifically low rate. And so, I mean, it's cheap money. Why wouldn't you want to take it?
Exactly.
It's like,
You're making Paul Krugman's argument.
Years ago, I had to explain to a friend of my father's, no, you don't want to give the automobile dealer $45,000 in cash. He's offering you 0% financing for 3 years. Why would you want to give him the cash up front? But he came from that mentality that says no debt.
Right.
Is best. So, having said that, I also wanted to say something about the question of what happened in California. And at its core, I think it's difficult for us to bring reason and rationality to an act which is fundamentally irrational.
You're right.
I don't think that this person or persons were thinking about their child outside of the notion that, they decided to have a child. And in many ways, that's just a human imperative. That's the way we sort of...
maybe they didn't even decide to have a child. Maybe they just decided to have sex, and a child was the product of it.
Exactly. Who's to say? But assuming that they operate like many human beings, this is our way of ensuring our immortality. We pass on our genes to someone else. So once having done that, they could then go about this, shall we say, act, which they, in their minds, may have defined as some sort of, hand of God act. Whereby, obviously God is going to, bless me for this, and God is going to take care of my child. So your rationality with regard to how you perceive this, and I think it's absolutely reasonable, is not the way that irrational people think of things, because they wouldn't have engaged in this kind of act had they been rational to begin with.
But see, there's a certain rationality associated with postpartum depression that. And you hear these stories, and I'm lousy with names. I'm not remembering the names of all these women who've been very high profile cases over the last 15, 20 years in the United States who killed their children. But the story is always the same, or an essential variation of the same. And it's, life is so terrible. I am so depressed. I'm so unhappy. They will say they are so unhappy, so depressed, so miserable, that they assume that that's simply the experience of life, or they're so deep in that hole that they project that onto everybody. In other words, they're saying that they are in so much pain, these women experiencing postpartum depression. Nobody should experience pain like this. My children are going to have to grow up to experience pain like this. I don't want to inflict it on my children, therefore I'm going to kill my children to save them from this pain.
Right, and I think that that's a legitimate analysis with regard to the issue of postpartum depression. However, I think given this narrative that these two people met, they got married, that this started long before they had a child, or planned to have a child apparently, and that having a child was just sort of a sideline that had nothing to do with in terms of what they intended to do. The fact that they were radicalized long before this child was ever in their thinking.
Well, we're still trying to find the evidence that the husband was radicalized by anybody other than his wife, and there doesn't seem to be much evidence of that. And his wife might have been the radical to begin with.
Well, his travel, as you pointed out, to places like Pakistan and so forth, took place before the birth of their child.
Yeah. His wife was born in Pakistan. She came from Pakistan. Right. She was a mail order bride, basically.
Absolutely. That's my point. Is that what we do know what the narrative is currently. There are certain established facts,
right?
And the postpartum depression. There's nothing to suggest that played a role in this.
No, there isn't, and I'm not strongly suggesting that that's got to be it. I'm just saying that's one of that's one of many possibilities, and I'm surprised that it's one that I haven't seen in the media.
Well, in part, as I've said, it doesn't fit the timeline, given what we know about these two. But, that doesn't lessen the notion that postpartum depression is a serious issue in this country.
Well, that's a good point, Steve. In other words, you're saying that they had been planning this for some longer period of time than just since the baby was born, because postpartum depression usually sets on fairly close to birth. But I'm thinking that it doesn't, with the gun laws in the United States, if you want to get 5,000 rounds of ammunition and a half a dozen guns and enough gunpowder to build 10 pipe bombs, you could do that in 6 months in California without a problem.
Right, except with regard to the timeline, we know that, when they met, how long ago they met.
Oh, but that might have all been just
back.
falling in love. That might have been him getting this mail order bride and say, "Oh, she's one." And I'm using that term. I've got to come up with a better phrase for it. A dating service, whatever. It might have just been his falling in love. I mean, who knows? Steve, thank you for the comments.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.